Broadcasting the information the mainstream media won't touch. This is The Richie Allen Show in association with DavidIke.com.
Let's welcome our first guest to the show. I'm sure you know all about her. She's a Respect Party activist and the author of the terrific In the Hands of the Taliban. She wrote for many years for the Sunday Times, The Independent on Sunday, The Observer. And in fact, she was writing for the Sunday Express in late September 2001 when she was captured by the Taliban in Afghanistan, which of course is what In the Hands of the Taliban is all about. I can't imagine that was a pleasant experience. She has been recently touring the Palestinian refugee camps in Lebanon, and she witnessed while there the arrival of countless Syrian refugees. It's pretty timely to be talking to her with everything that's going on in Calais. Let's welcome to the programme Yvonne Ridley. Yvonne, you're very welcome. How are you?
Oh, I'm absolutely tops, and thank you so much for inviting me onto your show.
Well, thanks for accepting. It's lovely to have you on. It's been a few years since I read In the Hands of the Taliban, but it's a great read. It really is. I highly recommend it. Now, you do have another book in the offing, and we will come to that a bit later on. Before we talk about you touring the Palestinian refugee camps, Yvonne, and what you saw there, talk to us about those scenes we're seeing today on on any television channel you choose, of the French police moving in to move the 1,000 or so, well, at least the French say 1,000, but activists there say it's more than that, moving them out, and some of them are very distressed, and there was images of a woman trying to cut her own wrists. Yvonne, give us your take. What's going on there? What's happening?
Well, the international community needs to hang its head in shame. I mean, yesterday we had images of children being tear-gassed in Europe. Today we see the most vulnerable people at the so-called jungle being forcibly removed by the police. I actually do feel a little bit sorry for the police who were caught up in this, because let's face it, the instructions and the orders are coming from the politicians. And, you know, so many people that I speak to want to offer shelter, want to offer homes, want to take in the refugees who are heading to Europe because they've got nowhere else to go. And to see these people in Calais, you know, we're talking, Richie, maybe 2,000 or 3,000 people in total who have been sitting in that camp. And to put it in context, Lebanon, which isn't even the size of Cornwall, you could drop Lebanon in Cornwall. Lebanon has got nearly 2 million refugees. We offer to take 5,000 a year. You know, I think we have to show compassion and let these people in Calais come here.
What about those who say, and I'll be honest with you now, I'm one of them. I agree with you. To be honest with you, I've said several times on the programme, I'm incredibly conflicted here, Yvonne. But as an Irish guy, as somebody who's always been, my politics have always been left of centre, I see the terrible things happening to these people. And I mentioned earlier on what's happening on the Greek-Macedonian border, which is becoming another big flashpoint there as well. But at the same time, this government here, and it's ironic that so many of those men and women in Calais want to get across the channel to come here, because this country here particularly has a massive, or has had a massive part to play in the problems in Syria. And some people contacting this programme, and not necessarily now the right-wing mad men and women that you see, that we saw in Liverpool over the weekend, but people, you know, I would consider rational people, are saying, why aren't we focusing our efforts on stopping the interventions which are born out of our intelligence agencies, which cause the chaos that we've seen in recent times in Syria and Libya? It's a very conflicted place to be, I think, as a person. Not everybody who says, you know, we shouldn't, or we don't want to take in refugees, or we don't want to take in so many, or why don't we stop focusing on that, and why don't we focus more on the root causes of what's happened? What do you say to that?
Well, there has to be a multi-approach to this. because even if we open our doors to every single refugee, they will keep on coming because of the wars across the Middle East and Asia. So we have to go to the roots of that. And you're quite right. Britain, as well as a lot of other powerful countries, has its hand in the destabilization of the Middle East and Asia. And if we go back to the Iraq War, if the Iraq War had never happened, yes, Saddam would still be in power. He would be brutalizing his people. But let's face it, some of Britain and America's closest friends are ruling their people with a rod of iron. So, you know, you have to look at Saddam would never, ever have allowed Al-Qaeda to get a foothold in his country, and ISIS would never, or Daesh would never have been created. Daesh was created out of the aftermath of the Iraq War. So you would think that we would learn from history, that the politicians would learn from history, but sadly they don't.
We talk all the time with people whom have worked inside the intelligence agencies, genuine people like Ray McGovern, who spent a lot of time for many years in the CIA and others. And I kind of thank them, Yvonne, for saying some of the things that they're saying, because if anybody else said it, it would be dismissed as conspiracy theory. But ISIS as an organisation or as an entity, these were mercenaries that we saw funded and armed by the West to destabilise the Libyan government. Again, regardless of what anybody thinks about Muammar Gaddafi, that's historically accurate. Many of those then left Libya and went to Syria. And were given, again, the weapons and the money and the training and whatever else it was that they needed to overthrow the Assad government. Now, I understand there are people in Syria and there are Syrians living outside that country who have problems with the authoritarian way that Syria has been run for generations. But things were fine in Syria, weren't they? In terms of there was peace there was stability. The United Nations even said in the late 2000s, if I can grab the document from somewhere, that Syria was meeting its UN Millennium Goals. The country was doing okay. All of a sudden what we have there is an unimaginable hell. It's more sinister than just stupid mistakes, Yvonne, surely.
Well, Assad and his father before him and his father's brother committed and have committed and are committing horrendous atrocities in Syria. But the reality is Britain and America and other Western countries were quite happy to deal with Syria 10, 15 years ago. And of course now they're not. But all this spouting about human rights is purely pompous invective from their point of view, because the reality is Britain and America and other countries in Europe couldn't give a stuff about human rights. The one politician who has really impressed me in all of this human tragedy unfolding is Angela Merkel, who is still trying to say that Europe should have open borders. She's still trying to protect the Schengen Treaty. She's still saying that there's room in Germany for refugees. And she is the one leader in Europe who is actually showing compassion towards these poor people from Syria. There are Palestinians there as well. There are people from conflicts in Afghanistan. People are saying, what are the Afghans doing in all of this? Well, their country's not stable either, and their country has been subjected to an American invasion and occupation. So
I won't argue with you about Merkel. I could do, but I don't want to focus too much time on Merkel, because I want to get into talking about the plight of the Palestinians with you. But I want to take you up on one thing that you said, and it's about atrocities committed against his own people by the Assad government. Yvonne, I've never seen any evidence to support that. And I really am an objective journalist. Of course I have opinions. Of course I have. I'd be a liar if I said I didn't. And I do express them on this programme. But I take great care to tell people, look, this is my opinion. I'm not offering you fact. But in the case of the alleged crimes committed by the Assad regime, most of the information put out there by the British government about what Assad did or didn't do comes from a guy called Rami Abdul Rahman, who's based in Coventry. And he heads up the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights. And this guy's a dissident who is an unapologetic hater of everything Bashar al-Assad. And just a matter of interest, and I'll get your thoughts on that. Last week on the programme, 2 different journalists were on. Stephen Kinzer from the Boston Globe was on. I'm pretty sure, Yvonne, I mean, you've travelled all over the world. I'm pretty sure you've come across Stephen Kinzer. Stephen was on the programme. And a young Canadian woman called Eva Bartlett, who would have a lot in common with you in terms of her work to stop the oppression of the Palestinians. Both of them said that the absolute reality of what's taking place in Syria couldn't be further from what they would describe as the nonsense being put out by the Western media about Syria, and that there is no evidence whatsoever, either A, that the Syrian government used chemical weapons, or B, that there was a systematic targeting of the Syrian people. And Kinzer, Yvonne, went as far to say and this must interest you, because as a foreign correspondent, you lived in all of these countries that you wrote about. You were there on the ground. Kinzer says, and his article for the Boston Globe actually said that the US media is deliberately misinforming its citizens. Because he said, what's worse about this now, Yvonne, he said, is we don't even have correspondents over there anymore. They're writing about these issues from Washington, D.C. I'm not saying Assad is an angel, and I don't believe in any system of democracy whereby a father passes on to a son and to a son and to a son. But this guy was an ophthalmologist working in London. He was a reluctant, he succeeded or took the throne reluctantly because his brother passed away. Like I said, the UN loved the guy until 2010, 2011. I've just never seen any real evidence that this guy's been targeting his own people. What do you say to that?
Well, I was in the Syrian embassy in London in 2009 and 2010 over several human rights cases and people who were being held in the prisons and were being tortured. Some at the request of the Americans, by the way. America and Britain say, Britain says it doesn't torture, but we now know it's complicit in torture. The Americans couldn't give us stuff. Who knows who, that they have tortured in the past. And Syria was one of those states that opened its dungeons to the Americans and the Brits. And there was a couple of people that I was trying to get released from the prisons, and so that's why I know that some untoward things were happening.
I wouldn't doubt that, Yvonne, because
in Syria,
because of course he
have to know how the Syrian revolution began. It was the most reluctant revolution, and it took about 6-7 months of marching and protesting before the civil war broke out, and it was within Assad's gift to have stopped that. And I bet now he wishes he had.
But you know what, Yvonne? It could also be argued that there was very little he could do, because when the Obama administration put Robert S. Ford into Syria as the ambassador to Syria, it's, again, retired intelligence assets. And we're not talking about conspiracy theorists here. We're talking about credible people have said that he basically went to Syria to oversee the recruitment of Mujahideen mercenaries from countries in the region to basically bolster the so-called opposition to Syria. Exactly what we saw in Libya. And we remember last year, it's only last year that the former French Foreign Minister Roland Dumas worked under Mitterrand, as you well know. He said he was in London in 2009 and British intelligence agencies were telling him then that they were going to stir something big was going to happen in Syria. So the plan all along, I believe, and it's only based on the evidence, Yvonne, and you might have a different opinion, and of course that's why you're here to express that. I can only conclude, based on the evidence, I think the overwhelming evidence, that this is the latest in a long line of countries. As you quite rightly said earlier on, people that we were happy to do business with up to a certain point or up to a certain time, we come out again and say, oh, there's a crazy dictator killing his own people because they want democracy. We have to intervene. And I'm not saying this to you and I'm not referring this to you, but I say to others who fall for this narrative time and time and time again, how many times is it going to have to happen before people see through it for what it is? What do you say to that?
Well, there is evidence of meddling in the affairs of all of the Arab countries. There is a very pragmatic approach. And I just really look back to the days of Robin Cook when he said, let's have an ethical foreign policy. And there was a glimmer of hope that that Britain might start to lead the world in human rights and in ethics again. But of course, that flame was quickly extinguished under Blair, who, as we now know, had his own agenda and was the second Margaret Thatcher, really, in a lot of the things that he did.
He needs to be in The Hague, Yvonne. When you look at the Daily Mail this week and Tom Bauer's book and the revelations in Tom Bauer's book, which are no surprise to you because you follow this, of course, closely as a politician, as an activist and as a journalist, those revelations coming out about Blair and Richard Dearlove, none of it is new to us, but to have it in black and white, it's there. The man should be arrested and he should be charged with crimes against humanity, shouldn't he? Let's be honest.
Well, the thing that worries me about all of this, Richie, is this drip, drip, drip of poison that's coming out about Blair. And I wonder if that's deliberate, because if the whole lot just came tumbling out in one go, I don't think his feet would touch the ground before he ended up in the Hague. But every now and again, there's some more poison that comes dripping out. And it's, of course, it's not just Blair. It's members of his cabinet who were fully aware of what was happening.
What was going down, yeah.
What was going down. And, there's at least one foreign secretary who will have to be held to account. This is... I actually think that Blair will end up having to account in a court for some of the evil that he is responsible for, some of the wickedness that's happened. He will have to be held to account. Whether any of it sticks, I genuinely think that he will, or he will be unable to travel that freely, because
maybe something will happen to him, Yvonne. That does happen from time to time as well. You can say that's a conspiracy theory, but he might just shuffle off this mortal coil unexpectedly before that happens. I wouldn't be surprised, because if Blair was to tumble or was in any way to be indicted for anything, there'd be a lot of others. Now, I know the United States isn't signed up to the International Criminal Court, so people might say, well, Bush and Cheney and Rumsfeld wouldn't worry so much, but I think they would if Blair was to be, to have his collar felt.
Well, Cheney and Bush have thrown away their passports. I mean, they're not bothered about travelling overseas now, but Blair is. And if anything does happen to him, I will be extremely disappointed, along with millions of other people who need closure, who need to see that man stand in some form of court and account for the wickedness of and evil of what he did.
Millions of people. We're talking, in Iraq alone, we're talking over 1.5 million people killed.
He's a widow maker.
Yeah.
That's what I called him. How Sherry Booth can bear to sleep with a war criminal is beyond me. But, you know,
I would imagine, Yvonne, she moved out of that bedroom a long time ago. If ever there was a marriage that is staying together for the sake of their careers, I would guess, and maybe I shouldn't say that, it's not good journalism to be saying that, but I would guess at that. It's 17 and a half minutes to the top of the hour. Yvonne Ridley is on the programme. It's good to have Yvonne on, getting her take on what's been happening in Calais, what's happening in Greece, and what's happening around Europe with the fallout from the terrible situation in Syria. Yvonne is the author of In the Hands of the Taliban. She's got a new book coming out. We'll talk about that shortly. Yvonne, we talk about human rights abuses, and you know that what's happening in the United Kingdom at the moment, again, sometimes I'm a bit strong, maybe I go a bit too far, but I'm going to say this. To me, it's tantamount to a tyranny. And I'm talking about what the Conservative government has done in the last 8 to 9 months, what it did for 5 years in the coalition to absolutely brutalise the worst off people in this country. I mean, absolutely terrorise them in terms of benefit cuts. We hear horror stories every single day about severely disabled and ill people compelled to be embarrassed by going to a Department of Work and Pensions hearing to see about their availability for work and all of that. And that's just one aspect of it. Today we hear about the Snoopers Charter again, what that's really going to do, the powers of search and seizure it's going to give the police, our internet data, all of that. Cameron talked last year about conspiracy theorists being dangerous extremists. Anybody who disagrees with the official narrative of anything is going to be dangerous. The point I'm getting to here is we've seen so many of these incursions, so many of these illegal, either direct interventions or subversive interventions, you know, arming people that we know are going to go and do what ISIS have been doing and such like. What about those, Yvonne, who say that these people, as tyrannical as they might be, are not stupid? They know damn well that when a country like Libya is reduced to rubble by NATO airstrikes, when Syria is reduced to what it is now, they know that millions of people are going to be displaced, are going to move in. What about those people who say that that is an intended consequence of the actions of destabilising countries like Syria and others? It's an intended consequence because it divides and conquers people in countries like this, and it prevents us fighting against the common enemy, which is the tyrannical state. What do you think of that?
Well, I mean, there's you can look at a big picture and see meddling going on in so many different directions. One of the things that I'm still very curious about is why David Cameron dragged everybody to the House of Commons to discuss the option of bombing Syria. And to date, there has been 4 bombing missions. Now, that decision in the House of Commons when Hilary Benn made that not so great speech, I would say, I think people applauded because it was the end of a very long debate, and I think they were just glad that it was over. But there was such a rush for that debate. Everything was urgent. People stood up on both sides of the House, as you know, one after another, about why Britain needs to get in there and start bombing Daesh. And the reality is, since that date, only 4 bombing missions have been launched in Syria. And you think, why was there such a rush to do that? What was that all about? There are also the NHS is beyond intensive care. If we're not careful, we're going to lose it altogether. You mentioned works and pensions, and But let's remember that dreadful organisation, Atos, which decides whether people are fit for work or not, that was created under Blair. And it makes you realise that under Blair and under the Blairites, and Miliband was one of the Blairites, under the whole lot of them, you could hardly distinguish who was Tory and who was Labour.
Can I venture a guess, by the way? I mean, I'd love to get your opinion on this. Mm-hmm. Let me venture a guess. You posed the question, why have they only conducted 4 bombing campaigns? Again, and this is the conspiracy theorist in me, but I'm going to back it up again with a little bit of anecdotal evidence. Again, Yvonne, I would suggest is that what they really want is a ground invasion of Syria. Now, we know Sky News and BBC 24 rolls out, any given day it rolls out a former army general to say that the only way to deal with Daesh or ISIS or whatever people are calling them on a daily basis is a ground invasion. And I'm always reminded of something General Wesley Clark said some years ago, the former NATO Supreme Allied Commander. So he was no idiot, Wesley Clark even. He said that shortly after 9/11, funnily enough, it was in late September when you were having your amazing adventure. We'll say it was more than an adventure, of course, in Afghanistan. But Clark said after a meeting with Rumsfeld and Paul Wolfowitz, he was shown a memo describing the US's plans to take out 7 countries, namely Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Somalia, Sudan, and Iran. So for me, the agenda has always been for them to launch a ground offensive against Syria. What do you think?
I'm not sure about that, but I would say that the Americans probably have plans to invade and attack Britain and other countries in Europe. They'll have plans for everything because this is the nature of and paranoia and fear that is going on in America. They're still smarting over the last British invasion of America when the White House was burned down. And some people are still angry about that. War is big business in America. And, I remember listening to one of Bush's speeches, and he said, "We are a peaceful nation." Well, if America is a peaceful nation, why has it been at war or in a conflict with Mexico and people in Texas still say that they're occupied? America has been at war every single year since its inception, apart from 1892. Now, I'm not sure who the president was then or why there were no hostilities inside America or out, but 1892 was the last time that America was not at war.
And you know what, Yvonne, you can't talk about America and not talk about Israel. Mm-hmm. My feelings about Israel are well known. I don't believe Israel has a right to exist. I've said it time and time again. I am a history graduate, so I know all about the Sykes-Picot Agreement and the Balfour Declaration. Every country in the world came to be because of violence and because of upheaval. And I've always been for a 2-state solution, even though most of my friends, who are very passionate about what Israel has done, the apartheid situation that we have now, and what Israel has done historically, they believe in a 1-state solution. I still believe in a 2-state solution, pre-1967 borders. That'd be me. I'm an idiot, most people tell me. What about this idea of the greater Israel? Now, again, this used to be written off as fanciful conspiracy theory, but it isn't anymore because they talk about it openly now, stretching from the River Nile to the River Euphrates in Iraq. And Syria is right bang in the middle of that. And some of our listeners, by the way, we've had a massive amount of tweets on this. It's at Richie Allen Show on Twitter. To see what other people are tweeting, just put Richie Allen Show, all one word, into Twitter, press enter, and you'll see the 100 or so tweets that have come in the last few minutes. What about Israel's part to play in what's happening in Syria and the greater Israel idea? What do you think, Yvonne?
Well, I've got no doubt that Israel does have such ambitions. If you ask a cartographer to draw a map of Israel, they can't, because there is no end and no beginning to Israel's borders. It's occupying the Golan Heights. And the land up to the to Golan, and it's occupying the Shabab farm area in Lebanon. It spreads out. You know, as I say, it would be impossible to ask anyone to draw an accurate map of Israel. I disagree with you about the two-state solution.
You and everybody else, Yvonne. Nobody agrees with me. Go on.
I signed my first petition for Palestine when I was 13 years old, and it was explained to me. And I don't think you can sit down and negotiate with a thief until the thief has put all the stolen goods back on the table. Then you can sit down and say, okay, what is it that you want? And unfortunately, the Zionists have tried to conflate Israel with the great faith of Judaism. And I keep telling people till I'm blue in the face, not all Zionists are Jews, and not all Jews are Zionists. And that Zionism is a relatively new political ideology. And I'd like to see it wiped away, in as much as I'd like to see UKIP wiped away, as I'd like to see the Tories wiped away, and that has absolutely nothing to do with the great faith of Judaism. So, but the Zionists are working very hard to try and label people like you and I as anti-Semites. And, you know, my husband's an Arab. He is a Semite. Being a Semite, it doesn't mean being Jewish. Being a Semite means living and speaking a certain language in that region in the world. And so it could be argued that European Jews are not Semites. But anyway, that's another discussion for another day.
Can I ask you this, Yvonne, because we will rapidly run out of time, and I do want you to talk about your book before you go. I've enjoyed the chat now, it must be said. Before I ask you about the book, though, you talked about travelling in Lebanon and seeing Palestinian refugee camps. I've had men and women, sometimes with great difficulty because of access to the internet, speaking to this programme from Gaza, describing what can only be described as hell on earth. I suppose Syrian people will understand exactly what they're going through. And my greatest fear is that whenever they feel like it, we could have it again next year. We could have it this year, later this year, whenever Benjamin Netanyahu, who is a tyrannical war criminal, let's be honest about it, whenever he feels like it, well, you know, we'll claim that the Palestinians are getting a bit antsy again. There's a few rockets coming in. Let's go in and finish what we started. And Yvonne, I'm not a pessimist, but there's nothing to stop him doing that now. Do you worry about that? Is that a constant worry for those who campaign for Gaza, for Palestine, like you, that it can just happen again and, you know, the click of a finger and bang, it all starts again? What do you think?
I don't think that they want to finish Gaza off. I think they're using Gaza as a testing ground for their weapons. And at these arms fairs around the world, the Israeli arms dealers can say, oh, we've tried and tested this weapon. We saw what it did in Gaza. We used this weapon in Gaza. We used that. And, you know, here's the evidence and this is how it works. And they use Gaza as a testing ground. And I believe that there will be another war in Gaza this year. And I think it'll be in that very dangerous period between presidents in America, you know, where Obama will become a lame duck president. And about 2 or 3 weeks, there's a handover as the new guy or gal will come in. And that 3-week period is I'm fearful that that Israel will once again decide, hey, let's test out some more weapons, and they call it mowing the lawn, and of course we all know that the grass grows back.
It's genocide, isn't it? Whatever way it is, whether you're right or
it's vile.
It's just
it's
genocide.
absolutely vile.
How disgusted? Just before I ask you about your book, because we are going to quickly run out of time. How disgusted are you by the Canadian Parliament voting to condemn any, joining in with or supporting of the BDS movement? How disgusted are you by what happened in this country the week before last, when state bodies or anybody in the state that's supported by funding from the state are told you can't boycott Israeli goods, you can't exercise your conscience because we're not allowing that. That's absolutely reprehensible. Your opinion on that, what do you think?
I'm not surprised. I mean, the Israeli lobby is very powerful, very effective. We need to learn from it. And, but at the end of the day, Richie, nobody can make you or I pick up a packet of Israeli dates and put them in our shopping basket.
Absolutely right.
And, even if they follow us around various stores, it's just not going to happen.
That's brilliant. So you heard Yvonne Ridley right there, civil disobedience. Whether you're working for a state-sponsored body or not, exercise your absolute right to maintain your conscience and to listen to your conscience, and don't buy Israeli goods. I got to ask you about a book. You've got a book coming out in May. It sounds very serious. It's going to be about rendition and torture. Is that what it's going to be about?
It's about torture, and it's looking at torture from 1940 through the Second World War to the global war on terror. And it's asking the question, does it work? I've mentioned a little bit about the morals and the ethics and the legal issues, but I've sort of focused on, does it actually work? And which has annoyed a lot of human rights organisations who said this is not the question you should be asking.
But it is. It's a great question, because historically it's proven it doesn't work. Somebody who's subjected to torture will give up their grandmother to get away from it.
That's right. And the reason I wrote the book, it actually formulated inadvertently while I was being held by the Taliban, because my biggest fear is that I would be tortured for information. And I thought, I've got no information to give them.
What am I going to tell them? Yeah.
Well, what will they believe me when I say I know nothing? And I genuinely, knew nothing. There was nothing I could tell them that, and it really concerned me. Anyway, as it transpired, it wasn't something that happened, and I wasn't tortured, but nearly 800 men who've passed through the gates of Guantanamo were tortured, and every single one was asked the same question at some stage during the interrogations, and everybody was asked, where is Osama bin Laden?
Yeah.
Not one person could give any remotely accurate information about that.
They should have told him to ask the CIA, because they know all about him, of course. They would have told him very quickly. Just because we are right up on time now, because it is the top of the hour. I've overstretched news. I've enjoyed the conversation. Where can people find the book? I mean, I will invite you back on when the book is out, Yvonne, to chat about it. So when it comes out, I suppose all good online retailers.
Yes, and the publishers are Books Express, a small publisher, and they will be selling it online, but it will be in bookshops, and it will be on the internet as well. So it's May the 18th when it will be launched. But I would love to come back on to discuss it more in full, because Donald Trump has brought torture right back onto the table again. in America.
Yeah, I'll do worse than waterboarding, he said. Yvonne, it was great to have you on the show. Thanks for coming on. Of course, as the book comes out and you send me a review copy, I'll be first of all thrilled to read it, and then you'll be welcome to come on the programme to talk about it. Really enjoyed hearing what you had to say today. Good to have you on, Yvonne. Look after yourself, and we'll talk again soon.
Thanks very much, Richie. Okay.
Brilliant. Bye for now. Yvonne Ridley on the line to us there from her home. Really interesting lady, I think.